In the ancient land of Thrace, where the mountains rose like broken teeth against the northern sky, and the rivers ran cold and dark through valleys no sunlight ever fully reached, there lived a child unlike any other. His name was Orpheus. His father was Euagris, king of a rugged people who lived by war and song. His mother was Calliope, the muse of epic poetry, she whose voice had inspired the greatest tales ever sung by mortal tongues. From the moment of his birth, the world seemed to pause and listen. The wind softened, the trees leaned closer. Even the stones beneath the earth seemed to hum with a frequency that had no name. The child did not cry when he emerged into the world. He sang, a single note, pure and impossible, that echoed through the halls of the palace and drifted upward into the heavens themselves. On Mount Olympus, the gods turned their heads. Apollo, god of music and light, felt something stir within his immortal chest. He descended to Thrace that very night, wrapped in the guise of a traveler, and stood at the threshold of the palace where the newborn lay. He looked upon the child and saw what others could not, a gift, a burden, a destiny written in the stars before the world was made. Apollo did not speak to the king or the queen. He simply left something beside the sleeping child, a lyre. 7 strings stretched across a frame of polished tortoiseshell, crafted by the god's own hands. It was not an ordinary instrument. It was a key, a bridge between worlds. And when the child's fingers first touched its strings, the universe held its breath. Orpheus grew in the shadow of the Thracian mountains, and with each passing year, his gift revealed itself more fully. By the age of 7, he could make the rivers change their course with a single melody. By 10, the beasts of the forest came to him unbidden, lying at his feet as he played, their wild eyes soft with something that might have been worship. By 15, men spoke his name in whispers, as if saying it too loudly might summon something they were not prepared to face. He was no longer merely a prince. He was a phenomenon, a force of nature wrapped in mortal flesh. But Orpheus did not care for fame. He did not seek the adoration of crowds or the favor of kings. He played because he had to. The music lived inside him like a second heartbeat, and to silence it would have been to stop breathing. He wandered the hills alone, his lyre slung across his back, and he sang to the trees and the stones and the empty sky. The trees bent toward him as he passed, their branches reaching like the arms of lovers. The stones rolled from their resting places to follow the sound of his voice. Even the mountains themselves seemed to shift, ever so slightly, as if leaning in to hear. The gods watched. They always watched. And then came the call that would change everything. In the kingdom of Iolcus, a young man named Jason was assembling a crew for an impossible voyage. He sought the Golden Fleece, a treasure guarded by a sleepless creature in the distant land of Colchis, and he needed the greatest heroes of the age to help him claim it. Word spread across Greece like fire. Heracles answered, Castor and Pollux answered, Peleus, father of the yet unborn Achilles, answered. And when the messenger arrived in Thrace, Orpheus set down his lyre and listened. He did not seek glory, he did not seek treasure, but something in the wind whispered that he was meant to go, that his music would be needed in ways he could not yet understand. He joined the Argonauts. The voyage that followed would become the stuff of legend. 50 heroes aboard a single ship, the Argo, sailing toward the edge of the known world. They faced storms that rose from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. They fought creatures that had no names in any human tongue. They passed through the Symplegades, the clashing rocks that had crushed every ship that dared approach them, and survived only because Orpheus played a melody so powerful that the very stones paused in their collision, frozen by the beauty of the sound. But the greatest test came when they approached the island of the Sirens. The Sirens were not what the stories claimed. They were not beautiful. They were ancient, their voices carried the weight of every soul they had ever consumed, and their song was not seduction, it was inevitability. Men who heard it did not want to go to them. They simply forgot that anything else existed. They forgot their ships, they forgot their homes, they forgot their own names. They walked into the sea and drowned with smiles on their faces. The Argonauts heard the first notes drifting across the water, and their hands went slack on the oars. Their eyes glazed, their mouths fell open. Jason shouted commands that no one heard. The ship drifted toward the rocks. Orpheus lifted his lyre. He did not try to drown out the sirens. He did something far more dangerous. He played alongside them. His melody wove between theirs, not fighting it, but transforming it, turning their song of death into something else entirely. The Argonauts blinked. They shook their heads. They gripped their oars and rowed with desperate strength, pulling the ship away from the rocks as the sirens screamed in fury behind them. It was the first time in 1,000 years that their victims had escaped. Orpheus had saved them all. But he took no pride in it. He simply set down his lyre and stared at the horizon, his eyes filled with something that no one aboard could name. The voyage continued. The fleece was claimed. The heroes returned. And Orpheus went home to Thrace. He did not know that his true story was only beginning. It happened on a day like any other. The sun was warm, the sky clear, the wind carrying the scent of wildflowers from the meadows beyond the forest. Orpheus walked alone, as he often did, his lyre silent at his side. He was thinking of nothing in particular, or perhaps he was thinking of everything. The music that lived inside him never stopped, even when his fingers were still. It hummed beneath his thoughts like a river beneath ice, always moving, always seeking release. He heard laughter. It came from somewhere ahead, beyond a grove of ancient oaks. Light and bright and utterly unexpected. He had not heard laughter in so long that he had forgotten what it sounded like. He moved toward it without thinking, pushing through the undergrowth until he emerged into a clearing bathed in golden light. She stood at the center, a nymph, a creature of the wild places, born from the essence of the forest itself. Her hair was the color of autumn leaves. Her eyes held the depth of forest pools. Her skin seemed to glow with an inner light that had nothing to do with the sun. She was dancing, alone, spinning in slow circles with her arms outstretched, her feet barely touching the grass, her laughter rising like music into the air. Eurydice. He did not know her name, not yet, but he knew in that single instant that his life had just split in two. There was everything that had come before this moment, and there was everything that would come after. They were not the same life. They could never be the same life. She stopped dancing, she turned, their eyes met. The world went silent, not metaphorically, actually silent. The wind stopped. The leaves froze in mid-flutter. Even the insects ceased their endless hum. The universe itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Orpheus did not speak. He could not. Every word he had ever known had fled his mind like startled creatures. He simply stood there, his lyre hanging forgotten at his side, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his chest. Eurydice smiled, and in that smile, Orpheus found something he had been searching for his entire life without knowing it. A reason for the music, a destination for the endless journey his soul had been making since the day he was born. She was the answer to a question he had never known how to ask. They did not speak that day. They did not need to. She walked toward him, slowly, as if approaching a wild thing that might flee at any sudden movement. She stopped an arm's length away. She reached out and touched his face with fingers that felt like sunlight. Then she turned and walked back into the forest. Orpheus stood in the clearing until the sun went down. He stood there as the stars emerged one by one to light the darkness. He stood there as the moon rose and bathed the world in silver. And when dawn finally broke over the mountains, he was still standing. His eyes fixed on the place where she had disappeared. He would find her again. He knew this with a certainty that transcended thought. She was not a chance encounter. She was destiny wearing a mortal face. The days that followed were a fever dream. Orpheus searched the forests of Thrace, playing his lyre as he walked, letting the music carry his longing into every hidden corner of the wild. The trees bent toward the sound. The streams changed their courses to follow him. The creatures of the forest gathered in his wake, drawn by the beauty and the sorrow that wove through every note. And then, on the seventh day, she appeared. She emerged from between two ancient oaks, her eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been joy. She ran to him. He caught her in his arms. And in that embrace, the world that had been holding its breath finally exhaled. They were inseparable from that moment forward. Where one went, the other followed. They walked through forests that had never known human footsteps. They swam in lakes that reflected stars not found in any mortal sky. They lay in meadows and watched the clouds drift past and spoke of things that had no words, understanding each other through some deeper language that required no sound. Orpheus played for her, only for her. The music he made in her presence was different from anything he had created before. It was softer, warmer. It did not seek to move mountains or redirect rivers. It simply said, in the only way he knew how, what his heart felt but his lips could not express. I love you. I have always loved you. I will love you until the stars burn out and the universe folds in upon itself and time itself forgets how to move forward. She heard him, she understood, and she loved him back. The wedding was announced throughout Thrace. It would be held in the sacred grove where they had first met, beneath the branches of the ancient oaks, with the gods themselves as witnesses. Invitations were sent to heroes and kings, to nymphs and spirits, to every being that had ever known the power of Orpheus's music. But there was one invitation that mattered above all others. Hymen, the god of marriage, was summoned to bless the union. He came on the appointed day, descending from Olympus in robes of saffron and gold. His torch held high, his presence filling the grove with an aura of divine sanctity. The guests fell silent as he approached the altar where Orpheus and Eurydice stood hand in hand, their faces radiant with joy. But something was wrong. Hymen's torch sputtered. The flame that should have burned bright and steady flickered and hissed, sending up not light but smoke. Black smoke. Oily and thick, it stung the eyes of those who stood too close and filled their lungs with something that tasted like ash. The god's face was expressionless as he performed the rites, his voice flat, his words carrying none of the joy that such ceremonies should inspire. The guests looked at one another with fear in their eyes. They knew the old stories. They understood what such omens meant. But Orpheus saw only Eurydice, and Eurydice saw only Orpheus. They spoke their vows with voices that trembled with emotion, and when their lips finally met, the world seemed to brighten despite the darkness that swirled around them. The ceremony ended, the guests dispersed, and Hymen returned to Olympus without a word of congratulation or blessing. The fates had spoken, but no one had listened. The day after the wedding dawned clear and warm. Eurydice rose early, leaving Orpheus asleep in their marriage bed, his face peaceful, his breathing slow and steady. She wanted to dance in the meadow, to feel the grass beneath her feet, to celebrate the joy that filled her heart to overflowing. She slipped out of the palace and made her way to the fields beyond the forest, where the wildflowers grew thick and the air smelled of honey and green growing things. She was not alone. The shepherd Aristaeus had watched her from afar for months. He had seen her dancing in the forest, had heard her laughter carried on the wind, had felt his heart twist with a desire that knew no reason or restraint. He knew she belonged to another. He did not care. On this morning, seeing her alone in the meadow, something inside him finally snapped. He emerged from the trees. He called her name. Eurydice turned. She saw the look in his eyes, and she ran. She ran without thought, without direction, driven only by the primal need to escape. Her feet flew across the grass, her heart pounding, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Behind her, Aristeus gave chase, his longer legs closing the distance with every stride. She did not see the creature coiled in the tall grass. She felt the bite, a flash of pain in her ankle, sharp and sudden and impossibly cold. She stumbled, she fell, and as she lay there in the grass, her vision blurring, her limbs growing heavy, she understood what had happened. The poison was already spreading through her veins. She could feel it. A creeping numbness that started in her foot and climbed upward, inch by inch, claiming her body piece by piece. She tried to call out, but her voice was gone. She tried to move, but her muscles would not obey. Aristeus stood over her. His face had gone pale. The desire in his eyes had been replaced by horror. He turned and fled into the forest, and Eurydice was left alone. She thought of Orpheus, his face, his voice, the way he looked at her when he played his lyre, as if she were the only thing in the universe worth seeing. She had wanted to grow old with him. She had wanted to bear his children. She had wanted a lifetime of music and laughter and love. She would not have any of it. Her eyes closed, her breathing stopped. And Eurydice, bride of one day, slipped out of the world of the living and began her descent into the dark. The dryads found her body. They lifted her from the grass and carried her to the palace, their faces wet with tears, their voices raised in lamentation. The sound of their mourning reached Orpheus before the news did. He burst from the palace and ran toward them, his heart already breaking, his mind refusing to accept what his soul already knew. He saw her. He fell. The world ceased to exist. Hours passed, perhaps days. Orpheus did not move from her side. He held her cold hand in his. He stroked her hair. He whispered her name over and over, as if the repetition might somehow bring her back. But she did not stir. She did not wake. She was gone, and no amount of love or music or desperate prayer could change that simple, devastating fact. The funeral was held at sunset. They burned her body on a pyre of fragrant wood, and the smoke rose into the sky like a departing soul. Orpheus watched until the last ember faded. Then he lifted his lyre and began to play. The music that emerged was unlike anything the world had ever heard. It was grief given voice, sorrow made sound. It poured out of him in waves, each note a tear, each chord a cry of anguish that echoed off the mountains and reached the very heavens. The trees of Thrace wept, the rivers stopped their flow, the beasts of the forest came and lay at his feet, their own eyes filled with something that might have been understanding. On Mount Olympus, the gods fell silent. The music did not stop. Days passed, and still Orpheus played, neither eating nor sleeping nor acknowledging the world around him. His fingers bled on the strings, his voice grew hoarse and cracked, but the music continued. Relentless and terrible, a wound that refused to heal. And then, on the seventh day, he stopped. He set down his lyre. He stood. And in his eyes, something had changed. The grief was still there, but it had hardened into something else, something that looked almost like determination. He would not accept this. He could not. The gods had taken her, but the gods were not all powerful. There was a place where even they feared to tread, a kingdom below the earth where the dead dwelt in eternal shadow, a realm ruled by a god who had never known the touch of love. If Eurydice could not return to the world of the living, then Orpheus would go to the world of the dead. He would bring her back. The entrance to the underworld lay at the southern tip of Greece, in a cave called Taenarus, where the rock plunged downward into darkness so complete that no light had ever touched its depths. Mortal men did not go there. Mortal men who entered never returned. The path led to the realm of Hades, Lord of the Dead, and no living soul had ever walked its length and emerged to tell the tale. Orpheus did not hesitate. He descended into the dark. If this story is gripping you, subscribe now and ring the bell. Here, every narrative is a journey through the myths that shaped civilizations, and what comes next in the story of Orpheus will shatter everything you thought you knew about love and loss. The tunnel wound downward through the earth, growing colder and darker with every step. Orpheus walked without torch or guide, his lyre clutched to his chest, his eyes straining against the impenetrable black. He could not see, he could only feel. The walls pressed close on either side, slick with moisture that might have been water or might have been something else entirely. The air grew thick and heavy, carrying the scent of decay and ancient stone, and something else, something that smelled like the absence of hope. He walked for what felt like hours, perhaps days. Time had no meaning in this place. There was only the path, and the darkness, and the weight of the earth pressing down from above. And then he heard it, the sound of water. He emerged from the tunnel onto the shore of a vast underground river. The water was black and still, its surface reflecting nothing, swallowing light like a hungry mouth. On the far bank, he could see shapes moving through the gloom, shadows, thousands of them, the dead, wandering aimlessly through the eternal twilight of the underworld. But between Orpheus and that far shore stood an obstacle. Cerberus, the guardian of the underworld, rose from the shadows like a nightmare given flesh. 3 heads on a single massive body, each one bearing jaws that could crush stone and eyes that burned with the fire of the pit itself. The creature snarled as Orpheus approached, its 3 mouths opening to reveal teeth the size of daggers. Orpheus did not run. He did not beg. He simply lifted his lyre and began to play. The music that emerged was soft, gentle. It spoke of rest and peace and the quiet comfort of dreamless sleep. It wound around Cerberus like a blanket, soothing the rage that burned in those 6 terrible eyes. The creature's snarls faded to whimpers. Its massive body slumped to the ground. Its 3 heads lowered one by one until they rested on its enormous paws. Cerberus slept. Orpheus stepped past the guardian and made his way to the water's edge. A boat emerged from the mist. At its helm stood a figure wrapped in black robes, his face hidden beneath a deep hood, his hands gripping a long pole that dripped with river water. Charon, the ferryman of the dead, who carried souls across the Styx to their final destination. The ferryman raised one skeletal hand. "Payment," his voice rasped, though his lips did not move. "Payment is required." Orpheus had no coin. The dead were buried with gold in their mouths, a fare for the crossing, but the living brought nothing but their flesh and blood. He should have been turned away. He should have been cast back into the tunnel and left to wander in the dark forever. But Orpheus was not like other men. He played. The music that poured from his lyre was sorrow itself, given form and voice. It spoke of love lost and dreams destroyed, and the terrible weight of grief that no words could ever express. It spoke of Eurydice, her smile, her laugh, the way she had danced in the sunlight, the way she had looked at him on their wedding day. Charon listened. His skeletal frame seemed to sag beneath the weight of the sound. For a moment, something flickered in the hollow darkness beneath his hood, something that might have been memory, something that might have been regret. The ferryman lowered his hand. "Come," he whispered. "Come." Orpheus stepped into the boat. The crossing was silent. The black water slid past without sound, and the far shore grew slowly closer. And Orpheus felt the weight of the realm pressing down upon him with every passing moment. This was not a place for the living. The very air rejected his presence, pressing against his skin like invisible hands trying to push him back. But he did not stop playing. He could not. The music was the only thing keeping him alive in this kingdom of death. The boat touched the shore. Orpheus stepped out, and for the first time he saw the true scope of the underworld. It stretched before him in every direction, a vast grey plain beneath a sky that held no stars. The dead wandered through the gloom in countless thousands, their forms translucent and wavering, their faces blank with the empty acceptance of eternity. They did not look at Orpheus as he passed. They did not seem to see him at all. They simply walked and walked and walked, going nowhere, seeking nothing, existing in a state that was neither life nor death, but something in between. And ahead, at the center of the plain, rose the palace of Hades. It was enormous. Towers of black stone climbed toward the starless sky, their surfaces carved with images of death and judgment and the endless cycle of souls being weighed and sorted and sent to their final rewards. The gates were open, but no light emerged from within. Only darkness. Darkness deeper than the night. Darkness that seemed to breathe. Orpheus walked through the gates. The throne room of Hades was vast and empty and cold. The floor was polished obsidian, reflecting nothing. The walls were carved from the bones of creatures that had no names, and at the far end, seated on thrones of black iron, were the rulers of this terrible realm. Hades, lord of the dead. His face was pale as marble, his eyes dark as the void between stars. He did not move as Orpheus approached. He did not speak. He simply watched, with the patient attention of one who had all of eternity to wait. Beside him sat Persephone, queen of the underworld, daughter of Demeter. She who had been stolen from the world of light and bound to this kingdom of shadow for half of every year. Her face held a sadness that seemed to permeate the very air around her, a grief so old and deep that it had become a part of her being. They waited. Orpheus stopped at the foot of the thrones. He looked up at the god and goddess of death, and then he began to play. The music started softly, a whisper, a plea. It built slowly, gathering strength and depth, weaving a tapestry of sound that filled the vast chamber and echoed off walls that had never known such beauty. It spoke of love, true love, the kind that transcends death and time and the petty boundaries that separate one soul from another. It spoke of Eurydice, every moment they had shared, every dream they had built together, every hope that had been shattered when she drew her final breath. Orpheus sang. His voice rose above the lyre, carrying the words that his heart had been holding since the moment she died. He sang of the world above, of sunlight and flowers and the warmth of a summer breeze. He sang of the life they should have had, the children they should have raised, the old age they should have shared, walking hand in hand through forests that bent to honor their passing. He sang of faith, of trust, of the terrible, beautiful vulnerability of giving your heart to another and hoping, desperately hoping, that they would not break it. The dead stopped their endless wandering. They turned toward the palace, drawn by a sound they had not heard in millennia. They gathered at the gates, their empty eyes suddenly bright with something that might have been memory. In the throne room, something extraordinary happened. The damned ceased their punishments. Tantalus, condemned to stand in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink, forgot his eternal thirst. Ixion, bound to a wheel of fire that spun for eternity, felt the flames flicker and die. Sisyphus, cursed to roll a boulder up a hill only to watch it roll back down, sat down on his stone and wept. The daughters of Danaus, who had murdered their husbands and were condemned to fill leaking vessels with water for all time, set down their jars and stood in silence, tears streaming down their ghostly faces. And the Erinyes wept, the Furies, the three sisters of vengeance, whose faces no mortal could look upon without dying of terror. They stood in the shadows of the throne room, their hair writhing with vipers, their eyes burning with the fire of divine retribution. And as Orpheus played, tears began to fall from those terrible eyes. For the first time in the history of the universe, the Furies knew sorrow instead of rage. Hades did not move. His face remained expressionless, his eyes fixed on the mortal who stood before him. But something shifted behind those dark orbs. Something stirred in the depths of a heart that had been frozen for eternity. Persephone reached out and took her husband's hand. Orpheus finished his song. The last note hung in the air, shimmering, fading, dying. And then there was silence. Silence so complete that the very fabric of reality seemed to hold its breath. Hades spoke. His voice was deep and cold, like the echo of stone falling into an endless well. It carried no warmth, no comfort, no promise of mercy, but it carried something else, something that might have been respect. Why have you come here, mortal? Why have you disturbed the eternal peace of my realm? Orpheus met the god's gaze without flinching. He had descended into the kingdom of death. He had charmed the guardian and the ferryman and the spirits of the damned. He had made the Furies weep. After all of that, he was not afraid of words. "I have come for my wife," he said. "I have come to bring her back." The silence that followed was absolute. Hades leaned forward on his throne. His dark eyes seemed to bore into Orpheus's soul, reading the truth that lay there, weighing it against considerations that no mortal mind could comprehend. "You ask the impossible," the god said. "The dead do not return to the living. This is the law that binds even the immortals. To break it would be to unravel the very fabric of existence." Orpheus did not waver. "I ask for nothing more than what was stolen from me." She was taken too soon. Her thread was cut before its time. "I do not seek to cheat death. I seek only to delay it. Give her back her years. Let her live the life she was meant to live. And when her true time comes, I swear by the Styx itself, I will not try to stop her. I will hold her hand and walk her to your gates myself." Hades considered. The moments stretched into eternities. The dead held their breath. The Furies stood frozen, their tears still wet upon their cheeks. And then Persephone spoke. Her voice was soft as falling leaves, but it carried the weight of ages. She turned to her husband, her eyes filled with something that might have been hope. "Let him have her," she said. "Let him have what we were denied." Hades looked at his queen. Something passed between them in that glance. Something ancient and painful and impossibly tender. "Very well," the god said at last. "You may take her, but there is a condition." Orpheus's heart leaped. He stepped forward, his hands trembling on his lyre. "Anything, I will do anything." Hades raised one pale hand. "You will walk the path back to the surface. She will follow behind you, but you must not look back, not once. Not until you have both emerged into the light of the sun. If you turn, if you so much as glance over your shoulder, she will be lost to you forever. This is the price. Do you accept it?" Orpheus did not hesitate. "I accept." Hades nodded. He made a gesture, and the shadows at the edge of the throne room began to move. They swirled and gathered and coalesced into a shape, a form, a figure that grew more solid with every passing moment. Eurydice. She stood before him, her face pale, her eyes wide with confusion. She was still wearing the dress from their wedding, though it was faded now, colorless, like a memory that had begun to fade. She looked at Orpheus, and for a moment, recognition flickered in her eyes. Then Hades spoke again. "Go, now, and do not look back." Orpheus turned. He began to walk, and behind him he heard the soft sound of footsteps following in his wake. The journey upward was the longest of his life. The path wound through the darkness, climbing ever higher, twisting and turning through tunnels that seemed to stretch for eternity. Orpheus walked with his lyre clutched to his chest, his eyes fixed on the blackness ahead, his heart pounding with a mixture of hope and terror that threatened to tear him apart. He could not hear her. The footsteps had faded. The silence was absolute. He strained his ears, desperate for any sound that might confirm her presence. But there was nothing, only the echo of his own breathing and the endless dark. Was she still there? Was she still following? Or had Hades deceived him, sending him back to the surface alone, laughing at his foolish mortal hope? The doubt began to grow. It started as a whisper, a faint voice at the back of his mind. She is not there. It was a trick, a cruel joke played by gods who had never known love. You are walking alone. You have always been walking alone. Orpheus tried to silence the voice. He tried to focus on the path ahead, on the faint lightening of the darkness that might have been the first hint of dawn. But the doubt would not stop. It grew louder with every step, louder and more insistent, until it was screaming in his ears. Look back, just once, just to be sure. What harm could one glance do? His neck began to ache from the effort of keeping his face forward. His shoulders tensed. His hands trembled on the lyre. The weight of the uncertainty was crushing him, pressing down on his soul with a force greater than all the earth above. The light grew brighter. He could see it now. The exit, the mouth of the cave, glowing with the warm golden light of the sun. He was almost there, almost free, just a few more steps, but she was so quiet, so impossibly quiet. He reached the threshold. The sunlight touched his face, warm and welcoming, washing away the cold of the underworld. He was there. He had done it. He had crossed the kingdom of death and emerged alive. And then the doubt won. His head turned, his eyes looked back, and there she was. Eurydice stood in the shadows just behind him, her face pale, her eyes wide with something that was not fear. It was sorrow, acceptance. She had known this would happen, she had always known. Her lips moved, a single word, barely audible, lost in the space between them. Farewell. And then she was falling, not physically but somehow worse. The shadows reached for her like hungry hands. They wrapped around her body and pulled her backward, down into the darkness from which she had come. Her form grew translucent, fading, dissolving into the black. Orpheus reached for her. His fingers passed through empty air. She was gone. He screamed. The sound tore from his throat with a force that shook the walls of the cave and echoed out across the mountains of Greece. It was not a human sound. It was the cry of a soul being ripped in half. He ran back into the darkness. He stumbled down the path, calling her name, his voice growing hoarse and ragged. He reached the river Styx and fell to his knees at its black shore, begging Charon to take him across again. The ferryman refused. Cerberus woke. The three-headed guardian rose from its slumber and snarled at the intruder, its 6 eyes burning with renewed fury. Orpheus played, but the music had no power now. It was broken, like the man who made it. Cerberus snapped at his heels, driving him back toward the surface. He could not return. The path was closed. The gods had given him one chance, and he had failed. 7 days he sat at the entrance to the underworld, neither eating nor drinking, his eyes fixed on the darkness that had swallowed his wife for the second time. 7 days he called her name, his voice growing weaker with each cry. 7 days he waited for some sign, some hope, some miracle that would undo the terrible mistake he had made. None came. On the 8th day he rose, he took up his lyre, and he began the long walk back to Thrace. But he was not the same man who had made that journey before. The years that followed were years of wandering and sorrow. Orpheus walked the hills of Thrace alone, playing his lyre for the trees and the stones and the empty sky, his songs more beautiful and more heartbreaking than anything he had ever created. The music drew listeners from far and wide. Men came to hear him and wept openly. Women came and tore their clothes in grief. Even the gods paused in their eternal games to listen to the sound of a broken heart. But Orpheus took no comfort in their attention. He wanted only solitude. He wanted only to be left alone with his grief and his memories, and the ghost of the woman he had loved and lost twice. He rejected all company, he rejected all comfort, and he rejected most absolutely of all the attentions of women who sought to ease his sorrow with their love. This was not cruelty, it was loyalty. In his heart, he was still married. He would always be married. Eurydice was waiting for him in the underworld, and he would not betray her, not even in death. But his rejection had consequences he could not foresee. The women of Thrace grew angry. They had offered him comfort, and he had spurned them. They had offered him love, and he had turned away. Their anger festered and grew, feeding on itself, transforming into something dark and dangerous. And watching from the shadows, a god smiled. Dionysus, lord of wine and madness, had long resented Orpheus. The musician had turned from the wild revels of the Bacchic cult to worship Apollo, god of light and order. Every morning, Orpheus climbed the highest mountain to greet the rising sun, paying homage to the god who had given him his divine gift. He no longer danced in the moonlit groves. He no longer drank the sacred wine. He had abandoned Dionysus, and the god of chaos did not forgive such slights. The Maenads came on a night of the full moon. They were the wild women of Dionysus, his most devoted followers, driven to frenzy by sacred wine and divine madness. They danced through the forests of Thrace with torches in their hands and murder in their hearts, their screams echoing off the mountains like the howling of wolves. They found Orpheus sitting alone on a hillside, playing his lyre to the stars. At first, the music held them at bay. Its beauty was so great that even the rocks and branches they threw refused to strike him, falling harmless at his feet as if ashamed of their purpose. The Maenads howled in frustration. They could not touch him. The music protected him. But Dionysus had anticipated this. The Maenads raised their voices in a different kind of song. They beat their drums and clashed their cymbals and screamed their devotion to the god of chaos. The noise grew louder and louder, drowning out the gentle tones of the lyre, overwhelming the beauty with pure, primal sound. The spell broke. The first stone struck Orpheus in the shoulder, the second in the chest, the third in the face, and he fell backward, his lyre tumbling from his hands. The Maenads descended on him like a storm. They tore him apart. Their bare hands ripped flesh from bone. Their teeth tore at his skin. They pulled his limbs from his body and scattered the pieces across the hillside, screaming their triumph to the uncaring sky. And when there was nothing left to destroy, they seized his head and his lyre and hurled them into the river Hebrus. But Orpheus was not done. His head floated down the river, carried by the current toward the distant sea. And as it floated, it sang. The same voice that had charmed the gods of the underworld now rose from severed lips, a melody of such profound sorrow that the very waters wept to hear it. The lyre drifted beside him, its strings still vibrating, still playing, still making music even as its master's blood stained the waves. The river carried them to the sea carried them to the island of Lesbos. And there, on a foreign shore, the singing finally stopped. The Muses came. The 9 sisters who had given birth to his mother gathered the remains of the greatest musician who had ever lived. They buried his head at the base of a sacred tree, where it was said his oracle prophesied for generations, until Apollo himself commanded it to be silent. They cast his lyre into the heavens, where it became a constellation that burns still in the night sky. And Dionysus, satisfied with his revenge, transformed the Maenads who had served as his instruments. They became oak trees, rooted forever in the Thracian soil, unable to dance or sing or kill ever again. But the story does not end in tragedy. In the fields of the blessed, where the virtuous dead walk in eternal peace, a woman waited. She had been waiting since the moment she fell back into the shadows, since the moment his eyes met hers at the threshold of the living world. She had known he would come. She had always known. When Orpheus descended into the underworld for the second and final time, he did not have to charm Cerberus or bargain with Hades. The path opened before him. The shadows parted, and there, in a meadow that bloomed with flowers that had no name in the language of the living, she stood, Eurydice. He walked toward her, she walked toward him. They met in the center of the field, and for a long moment they simply looked at each other. Her face was no longer pale, her form was no longer fading. She was solid and warm and impossibly beautiful, just as she had been on the day they met. He reached for her hand. This time, his fingers did not pass through empty air. This time, he felt her warmth against his skin. This time, he did not look back. They walked together into the eternal twilight of the underworld, hand in hand, never to be separated again. The music that had once moved mountains and made the Furies weep now played only for her, soft and gentle, a love song that would continue for all eternity. His body was scattered across the Thracian hills, but his voice did not die. The head of Orpheus floated down the river Hebrus, still singing, still mourning the woman he had lost twice. The Muses gathered what remained and buried him beneath Mount Olympus, where nightingales sing over his grave to this day. And deep in the underworld, in the fields of the blessed, a woman waited. When death finally claimed him, they say Orpheus walked those shadowed paths once more. But this time, he did not look back. This time, Eurydice took his hand, and they walked together into eternity. 3,000 years have passed since Orpheus turned his head. Empires have risen and crumbled to dust. Seas have swallowed cities. Languages have been born and forgotten. But his song remains. It echoes through time, through culture, through the collective memory of humanity. Not because it was beautiful, because it was true. It spoke to what lives in every human heart. The fear of losing what we love, the terror of trusting what we cannot see, the desperate hope that love might be stronger than death. Orpheus asked that question at the threshold of the underworld. He answered it with a single glance, and the world has never stopped wrestling with what that answer means. Some say he failed, that his doubt proved he was unworthy of the gift the gods had offered, that if he had truly loved Eurydice, he would have trusted in her presence without needing to see it. But others know the truth. Orpheus did not fail because he loved too little. He failed because he loved too much. The thought of walking into the light without her was more than his heart could bear. He turned because he could not face a world where she might not be real. He chose one moment of certainty over an eternity of faith. And in that choice, he proved himself human. The gods demand perfection, but humans are not built for perfection. They are built for love and doubt and the terrible vulnerability of caring for something they cannot control. Orpheus walked into the underworld and moved the unmovable. He made death itself weep. He was given a gift that no mortal had ever received before or since, and he lost it because he was human, because he loved her, because in the end, that is what love does. It makes us weak, it makes us afraid. It makes us turn our heads at the worst possible moment, desperate for one more glimpse of the face we cannot live without. Orpheus lost Eurydice twice, but he found her in the end. In the realm beyond death, where time has no meaning and love has no limits, they walk together still. His music plays only for her. Her laughter is the only sound he hears. The tragedy of their mortal existence has been transformed into the triumph of their eternal union. The story of Orpheus is not a tragedy, it is a promise. That love survives, that death is not the end, that somewhere beyond the darkness, the people we have lost are waiting for us. And they will wait forever if they have to. All we have to do is keep walking. All we have to do is trust. All we have to do is not look back. If this story touched you, write in the comments. I will not look back.